Chapter 121. Leonard's guess. Hear Klein and Fry's guess. Leonard pulled off the shirt collar, paced back and forth a few steps. Then it is very troublesome to investigate all the people that Thors came into contact with in the workhouse, and everyone he met after he went bankrupt and was driven out of the house. Let's hurry up and do a separate investigation here, and then go straight to the third death in the West and hand over the rest to the police. Okay. Klein answered without hesitation. Fry had no objection, and turned to several poor people who slept near Souls last night. Klein was about to find another target when he suddenly saw Leonard winking at himself and pointing his chin at the side hall of the workhouse. What do you mean? Confused, he pretended that nothing had happened and turned half a circle around the mass hall. Then, while Fry was not looking, he followed Leonard's footsteps, entered the side hall, and through the partition, came to a quiet corner. I have a guess. Leonard stopped in front of the broken glass window and said suddenly and directly. Klein looked around doubtfully and said, "What guess?" Leonard, green eyes deep, asks, "What do you think will happen to Mrs. Laws without the influence of extraordinary factors?" Klein thought for a moment and said rather heavily, "It's still the same ending, but it will be delayed for a week, 2 weeks, or a month. For their family, they will definitely not go to the doctor until they can't support it. As long as the heart disease becomes serious, death may come at any time, and there will be no room for saving." What about Souls? If he hadn't been instigated, what kind of ending would he have? Leonard asked again. Klein considered opening. From the information introduced, Souls has long been full of resentment against bankruptcy, and he is extremely resentful about not being rescued. I think he will retaliate sooner or later, but the object will not be the rescued person, but the boss of the company that caused his bankruptcy and the bank employee who took away his house. What will happen after his revenge? Leonard asked one. There is no doubt that he has planned to end his life, and he will die whether revenge is successful or not. Klein made a positive answer. Leonard nodded slightly, revealing his trademark frivolous smile. Then can I say that Mrs. Laws and Thors are both doomed to die in the near future? Klein is a well-informed keyboard strong. After hearing this question, immediately had a guess. You mean their death was artificially advanced by extraordinary factors? Why is this? More accurately, the life they should have was artificially shortened and stolen by extraordinary factors, and life has always been the best material for summoning evil spirits and demons to make terrible curses. Leonard corrected Klein's guess with a slightly upturned mouth. Callball, devil, terrible curse. Klein stared at each other's green eyes, half questioning and half speculating. You seem very sure? But there are only 2 samples in our survey for the time being. Leonard smiled cynically and said, Klein, there is no need to pretend between us. I have seen you get rid of the control of the seal 2-049 and know that you are special, and you should vaguely feel that I am different from ordinary extraordinary people. He convergent smile, meet Klein's eyes. I once told you that there are many special people in this world who can always do things that others can't, such as you and me. The world has a long history, and there are magical things of one kind or another. There will always be people who get them, master them, and become the protagonists of different dramas. There will not be too many such people, but it is definitely impossible to have only 1 or 2. I don't think that the extraordinary person who hides the secret must be a bad guy or a villain. I don't think it is necessary to find out what their uniqueness comes from and why they behave. As long as your behavior does not harm me, the night watchman, and the whole city of Tingen, then you will still be my teammate. Similarly, I hope you'll treat me with a similar attitude. Of course, it is best not to tell the above people about this kind of thing. Those guys are all stuffy and conservative always, but I'm afraid my secret is more than you think. Klein silently to himself and said frankly, I really have this attitude. I only look at your behavior and purpose, don't care about your particularity, and don't try to pry into your secrets. After saying this, he silently added in his mind, No, actually, I still care about it, and I am quite curious, but I can only endure it. Well, Leonard thinks he is the protagonist of a drama? What adventures did he get, and what magical items did he have? Leonard unbuttoned his shirt collar and smiled to nod away. I'm glad we have reached an agreement. In those adventure novels, This is the meeting of the two protagonists, and the wheel of history begins to roll forward. Shameless. Klein gave a perfunctory smile. He clearly knew that the wheel of history began to roll forward came from Roselle the Great. At this time, Leonard quickly strolled twice, with bright green eyes and corners of the mouth sketched. Well, frankly speaking, I have no doubt that the protagonists of these deaths should die one after another within 3 months, but they have been brought forward to the last 2 weeks in various ways. And the other party's purpose is to summon evil spirits and demons, or to carry out a terrible and wide-ranging curse. Let people who show signs of death die early. It is easy to cover up the past, and it will not attract the attention of the police department soon, and it will not be destroyed by the night watchman, the Punisher, and the mechanical heart in the preparation stage. Klein muttered to himself, analyzing the thought behind the scenes. Asterisk, 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 Nader echoed with a smile. Yes, if there are healthy and normal people who suddenly die inexplicably, as long as there are more than 3 cases, they will definitely be concerned and will be routinely investigated. Then how can we find the altar for the ceremony? Whether it is to summon evil spirits, demons, or create terrible curses, altars and rituals are needed, and those lives that are harvested in advance must also have similar places to store them. Klein can trust each other. After all, he can't find other clues and make another judgment. It won't hurt to try. Leonard smiled 2 times. Klein, shouldn't this be your field of expertise? Can't you imagine what will happen around the altar of a similar ceremony? Before Klein could answer, he first described, there is a strong smell of death, with the altar as the center of the ball, and within a radius of 10 meters, there will be no living creatures except the host of the ceremony. The surrounding temperature is at least 5 degrees Celsius lower than normal, and there is a cold wind blowing constantly. Among the altars sealed by the spiritual wall, there are lives taken away by Mrs. Laws and others. Speaking of which, he looked at Klein and joked, I'm sure you can predict where the altar with these characteristics is. Klein frowned slightly. Cinca voice replied, as long as it doesn't go beyond Tingen. In addition, I need an absolutely quiet and undisturbed environment, such as my home. Well, I also need Mrs. Laws and others' belongings. At the same time, he made a whisper in his heart and felt that Leonard knew too much about this black magic. No problem. Leonard smiled, and Horan stepped over Klein and walked to the mass hall, but he didn't bother. This guy's style of doing things is really unique. Klein lamented and followed the other side back the same way to find Fry, who was seriously asking and taking notes. Leonard said solemnly with a serious expression, I have a guess, and I intend to let Klein try. What guess? Fry asked, seemingly coldly. I'll tell you when I have the results. I don't want to be the object of Luo Shan's ridicule. Leonard made an excuse at random and perfunctory things in the past. Fry didn't ask any more questions. As told, he borrowed the belongings of Souls and Mrs. Laws from the nearby police station and then met his teammates at Klein's home. You wait in the living room and don't let anyone disturb me. Klein took out his pocket watch, snapped it open and glanced at it. It's nearly 6 o'clock at this time, and Melissa may come back at any time. You can trust us. Leonard walked around the small living room with his hands in his pockets, while Fry sat quietly on the sofa. This guy is ADHD, right? Klein left his mouth, returned to the bedroom on the 2nd floor, locked the wooden door, and sealed the room with a spiritual wall. Then, he arranged the altar and prayed for the help of the goddess to preliminarily eliminate the interference. Then, Klein wrote the corresponding divination statement on paper. The location of the altar. He gave a wide range of restrictions to avoid mistakes and omissions. Taking this piece of paper and the belongings of the deceased, Klein lay on the bed, recalled the scene described by Leonard first, and then recited the divination sentence 7 times. He didn't try to use the special above the fog to complete it. First, because Leonard, a strange and mysterious guy, is downstairs. No one knows if he will notice any clues this time. Second, he belongs to the diviner who is about to digest the potions, and with the assistance of the ceremony, it should be enough. There is really no result, and Klein will consider looking for another opportunity to go to the fog. After all, summoning evil spirits and demons will threaten Benson, Melissa, and his own business. With the help of meditation, he quickly entered the dream and saw the scenes that were vague, hazy, illusory, and fragmented. Soon, a picture appeared before his eyes. It was a two-story gray-blue house bathed in dusk brilliance. Conspicuous that nowadays, he no longer relies on stimulating specific parts to open second sight, so he can achieve his goal in a more secret way, such as quickly pinching two joints of his middle finger with his thumb, such as tapping his left tooth twice in a row, considering that sometimes he has to hold a gun and a walking stick in one hand. But he must use a second sight. Klein finally chose the way of tapping his teeth, opening on the left and closing on the right. Constantly hinted that. After the change, he opened his eyes, smiled, and said, "I just pay too much attention to the captain's actions and don't need to calm down." At the same time, he tapped his left tooth twice and tried to open second sight, so as to get familiar with this method as soon as possible. Cough, cough, cough. Old Neil suddenly coughed violently, blushing like a cooked lobster. "What's the matter?" Klein hesitated for a moment and asked with concern. He carefully examined old Neil's aura and found that the other person's healthy color was normal, but he was relatively weak because of his age. Old Neil coughed for more than 10 seconds before he slowed down. He reached for his coffee and slowly took a sip. "Everyone makes mistakes." "Well, I just choked on my own spit. So, shall we start today's occult course?" "Okay." Klein tapped his right tooth almost silently twice. Digesting the soothsayer potion 1 to 2 weeks earlier than expected made him both happy and annoyed. Needless to say, getting rid of the hidden danger of losing control, getting promoted soon, and mastering more extraordinary abilities is enough to make anyone feel happy and excited. The trouble is that it has disrupted his arrangements and plans. Considering that he'll stay in the Night Watchman team in Tingen for a long time, Klein thinks that it is not a good choice to quietly become a clown. At that time, he will always worry about exposure and dare not use the corresponding ability in the task that needs cooperation, so that he will fall into greater danger. His plan is to follow the example of Psychic Daily, submit a special application to the top, and exchange the accumulated meritorious service for the reward of formula and extraordinary materials, and become the Night Watchman of Sequence 8 above board. However, there is an essential difference between mastering potions in 1 month and mastering potions in 1 year. Klein can bear the attention of the temple and is willing to be the key training object, but he definitely does not want to attract high suspicion from the upper level. He must find a convincing reason for his state. His original arrangement was to seize the time when the potions of the soothsayers have not been completely digested and gradually make some preparations at the captain's place. For example, he mentioned that every time he went to the divination club, he felt spiritually lively. For example, he pretended to describe the soothsayer's rules summarized from helping people to divine again and again. For example, he said in advance that there had been basically no cases of hearing voices and seeing things that he shouldn't have seen recently. In this way, the Night Watchman senior management will think that he unconsciously imitated Daily when completing the task and did it more thoroughly. This will make them focus on summing up the rules and exploring in the direction of acting, greatly reducing their doubts about Klein and only doing routine review. Well, it can also remind the captain to help him discover the acting method. Klein silently added in his mind that for him, Dunsmith is a very good captain, except for his poor memory, and he has no major shortcomings, so he hopes to reduce his hidden danger of losing control and make him stronger. Of course, Klein can also choose to wait a year before submitting a special application, which will not take any risks. But the continuous coincidence and the red chimney he saw in his dream divination forced him to improve himself as soon as possible. Next, I will do 3 or 4 times with the captain in 2 weeks, and then formally apply. At the same time, I can also go to the underground trading market to see if there are any corresponding extraordinary materials. It should be very expensive. Klein quickly made a decision and turned his attention back to the occult course. As time went by, a wonderful lunch time came slowly. Old Neil finished his coffee in the cup. While picking up the sundries on the table, he smiled a track. "Your occult course is coming to an end. Judging from your previous attempt, you can make spells for yourself. This is exactly my schedule for the next few days." Klein heaved a sigh of satisfaction. The The charm is different from the amulets he gave to his brother Benson and his sister Melissa before. It must be engraved with the help of ceremonies, and it has certain special abilities and can be used in fierce battles. However, the low-grade spells are also not omnipotent. Their spirituality will continue to decline, and they must be made again every 2 weeks. Moreover, they need specific spells to be opened, and they cannot be used immediately if they want to use them. In addition, the spells that the Night Watchman can master are still limited to the domain of the Goddess of the Night. At present, Klein can only make 3 kinds. One is the Sleeping Charm, which is similar to the singing of Dunsmith and Leonard Mitchell, and the other is the Requiem Charm, which can appease ghosts, zombies, and water ghosts, and deal with resentful souls and evil spirits to some extent. These effects are similar to the Midnight Poet and Nightmare ability of the Sleepless sequence, so Dunn and Leonard almost don't use spells, but Fry, the Corpse Receiver, and Luo Yao and Cohen Lee will carry 1 or 2 pieces with them. But they are useless for a long time, and they have to find Old Neil to recharge from time to time. At this time, the Old Neil caught a glimpse of Klein, smiled, and said, "I remember that you practiced too often this month, and the material quota is gone. Are you going to the underground trading market?" Klein, first one lung, immediately lovingly nodded. Yes. He knows the price of those materials and only hopes to succeed once, and don't waste them. After shouldering the task of sending lunch underground, Klein put on his coat, hat, and cane and returned to the Blackthorn Security Company on the 2nd floor. Passing by the recreation room, he saw Leonard and others have returned and are having dinner. Knock, knock, knock. He knocked on the door of the captain's office. "Please come in." Dunn's mellow voice came out. Klein pushed the door and took off his hat and said, "Captain, did you catch Trish, the instigator?" Dunn pinched his temples and shook his head slightly wearily. "We didn't find her at Tingen Station, but according to the telegram from Backlander, some passengers saw her in the first-class carriage of the earliest flight. Unfortunately, she got off halfway." "What a pity." Klein sighed psychologically. Divination is not everything. Dunn gray eyes swept away. "You don't need to be depressed. The extraordinary person in Sequence 7 is not so easy to catch. At least we destroyed Trish's evil ceremony and saved at least 40 innocent lives. Moreover, we have mastered her current situation so that she can no longer commit crimes as before. If she wants to do something similar, she may be noticed, discovered, and reported at any time. Sooner or later, she will be found, caught, and, of course, killed by our Night Watchman, or the Penalty Taker and the Mechanical Heart. I hope so. May the goddess bless me." Klein drew a scarlet moon on his chest. Then he paused. "Consider the language way. Captain, I haven't heard anything I shouldn't have heard for more than a week, and I have seen something I shouldn't have seen, and this is the case that I often meditate and often use second sight." "Huh." Dunn frowned slightly in disbelief. Klein immediately added, "I feel that I am not far from fully mastering the diviner potion, which may be related to my frequent visits to divination clubs to help people divine." "Why do you have such an idea?" Dunn changed his sitting position and showed a puzzled expression. Klein replied deliberately, unsmoothly, "Every time I go to the divination club, I feel spiritually lively, and after each divination, my body, mind, and spirit will be much easier. I also summed up a set of rules for diviners and strictly followed them, just like spying on a secret person's do whatever you want, but don't hurt. Oh, I think this may be an effective way to help the extraordinary master the potion as soon as possible and reduce the loss of control, just like Ms. Daly, who has been a psychic." Dunn didn't know when he took out his pipe and put it on his nose and sniffed it gently. He seemed to forget Klein and thought for several minutes before he said, "Good guess, interesting attempt. Klein's purpose this time is just to click and pave the way, so he didn't mention it anymore. Instead, he said half jokingly and half a dozen shots, Maybe I will become the fastest member in the history of the Night Watchman to master the serial 9 potions. May the goddess bless you." Dunn didn't smile and bless him seriously, and then he fell into thinking again. Upon seeing this, Klein got up to leave and left the captain's office. While helping to cover the door of the house, he suddenly thought of another problem. That is, how to play the clown. You won't let me join the circus, will you? Moreover, there is no fixed circus in Tingen, and it is all a kind of touring performance. Klein's expression becomes bitter. Being a fortune teller is hard. Even if you are met by an acquaintance, you can hold your head high. If you are a clown, there is no dignity at all. Maybe there is another way to play. When the slate was desecrated, there was no circus or clown. Forget it, there are still 2 or 3 weeks to get a promotion. Don't worry about this problem first. Klein escaped to the sofa area of the reception hall, to Luo Shan, Mrs. Oleana, Brett, and others, and to his own lunch with old Neild. Chapter 128. Poor fool. After delivering lunch and filling his stomach, Klein only rested for more than half an hour and hurried to the shooting club to practice firearms, not daring to relax, with the support of thousands of bullets and persistence day after day. His current shooting level has finally reached the passing line. That done, Smith thinks, especially the fixed target. After repeated mechanical exercises again and again, he put away his revolver, arrived near the residence of fighting teacher Gao Wen by rail coach, and walked to the front of the gate in 10 minutes. Then, he changed into a knight's training suit that had just been sun-dried and practiced from running, skipping rope, lifting weights, squatting and other projects to the pace and punching so that sweat flowed and his body was exhausted. Take a break for 15 minutes. Gao Wen, with blonde hair and white temples and a weathered face, took out his pocket watch, snapped it open and glanced at it. From the beginning to the present, he has always remained silent. Only when he changed his training methods and Klein's certain movements were not standardized did he open his mouth to remind him. Klein, panting, didn't dare to rest directly, and walked slowly back and forth. The most intuitive reaction to his fighting practice these days was that his skin turned a lot black and became the so-called wheat color. Gawain put away his pocket watch, stood by the rough driving range behind the house, and watched Klein relax with his hands on his chest, as quiet as a marble statue. Teacher, besides unarmed combat, will you teach me how to use the straight sword, the big sword, the stab sword, and the pike? Klein, who had just adjusted the soothsayer potion, was in a good mood and took the initiative to ask. In Gawain's collection room, he saw weapons such as straight swords and stab swords, breastplates and full-length armor, and knew that the other side was not only good at unarmed combat. Gawain, bathed in sunshine, glanced up at him and said in a low voice, "It's useless for you to learn these things. They are all things that are behind the times and can only exist in museums and private collection room in the future." He was silent for a few seconds and then added with the vicissitudes of tone, "They've been eliminated. What you should pay attention to is firearms. Even if you fight, it is only an aid." Klein looked at the demoralized fighting teacher and smiled. "I don't think so. All ministers, all parliamentarians, and all generals think so." Gawain bit his teeth and said. Klein stopped, pretending to be typing like a real keyboard strong can and talk about. "No, they just quit the frontal battlefield and have other uses." Why must fighting and firearms become opposites? They can be completely integrated. I believe that people who are more flexible and agile and have faster reactions can better play the role of firearms. See the silence. Gawain's eyes become sharp. Klein slightly proudly continue. "Other weapons have not been eliminated, but they need to be improved to make them more portable. We can organize a very mobile team, bypass the frontal battlefield, go straight for the enemy's rear, and go straight for their center. In this small-scale raid, soldiers with excellent fighting ability and good at all kinds of weapons can play a very important role. You can imagine such a scene." He played the skill of knowing a little about everything and described the way of special forces fighting on the earth at random. Gawain's breathing began to get heavy, and he stood there motionless, as if unwilling to break the imaginary picture. Klein glanced at each other's reaction. Secretly, Hay cleared his throat, so portentously said, "Teacher, what do you think of my idea? Is it possible to achieve it?" Gawain's body trembled obviously, as if he finally woke up from a dream. He took a deep look at Klein and spoke in a low voice. "The effect of your rest is very good. Now do all the previous exercises in 10 groups. Ah, Klein has a blank face soon. He woke up and started running again, and shouted wildly in his heart. 10 groups? Teacher, don't. I don't want to celebrate myself by completely digesting the soothsayer potion in this way. Hey, aren't you touched? Looking at Klein running to the other side of the training ground, Gawain suddenly loosened his hands and covered his face with one palm. His eyes were tightly closed, and the wrinkles on his face were deep and striking. Once again, Klein, who was almost tired of vomiting, took a shower, changed his clothes, said goodbye to Gawain, the still silent fighting teacher, and left the other party's residence by bus. He didn't go home directly, but went to the Dragon Bar in the dock area, intending to go to the underground trading market to know the price of extraordinary materials and buy items to make spells on the way. Klein took care of the small vault he carried with him, forced himself not to sleep, and made it very difficult to reach his destination. I have to leave a balance of £4 for the entrustment, and all I can use is £3 and 5 souls. He touched the money in his pocket and walked out of the carriage with a cane. At this time, the sun has begun to set in the west, and the luster of dusk has permeated all the houses, and the boxing and dog-catching mouse competitions in the Dragon Bar are warming up. Through the billiard room, through a heavy room, Klein entered the underground trading market. He looked around and didn't find the monster. Admi's soul, who is always active here. Didn't old Neil say that the monster could only survive if Sven, the owner of the Dragon Bar, took him in and gave him a bite to eat? Klein slightly confused himself that as a night watchman, he was alert enough to similar things, so he approached the strong man standing by the door and asked, "Where's Admi's soul?" The strong man replied without a smile, "I don't know where to sleep. He's always been like this recently. He's been lying shivering and yelling, 'Dead, dead, all dead bodies, all dying.'" What did he see? What kind of excitement did you encounter? Klein, eyebrows slightly wrinkled, carefully asked a few words. Want to find out where Admi's soul is sleeping, but the guards don't know. When I'm finished, I'll use divination to find him and see what happened to him. Klein wrote it down and walked to one of the 2 rooms at the end of the trading market, according to old Neil. The room on the left is used for borrowing and returning, and the room on the right is a place for selling and buying precious things, including extraordinary materials. Knocking on the door of the right room, Klein found that it was divided into 2 rooms, inside and outside, and 3 customers were waiting outside. He lowered his half-height silk hat, sat behind the 3 customers in sequence, leaned forward, pressed his cane, and waited in silence. Before long, the partition door opened and a customer dressed as a blue-gray dock worker came out. He bowed his head and left in a hurry without stopping. Klein tapped his left tooth twice, looked at him with second sight, and looked at the other 3 customers. Nothing unusual happened. Of course, certain ailments still exist. After another 10 minutes, it was finally his turn. He opened the partition door and went into the inner room where the kerosene lamp was lit. Locking the door, he sat in the chair belonging to the customer, looking at the old man wearing a black bonnet across the way. "I want to know what extraordinary materials you have and what their prices are." The old man has drooping cheek muscles and deep wrinkles around his eyes, but he is quite burly. He is not surprised by Klein's request, because many customers don't want people to know what he wants to buy until they are sure that they have some special materials, and generally want to introduce them all. The old man turned to the latest pages of the notebook, saw Klein one eye, picked up the honey wine placed in front of him, and took a sip. Water ghost brain tissue, depending on the degree of integrity, ranging from £3 to £15, star crystal £150 per 50 grams, queen grass £200, adult black frog £170 each, face rose £280, only one. Klein controlled his emotional reaction and listened to the old man's introduction quietly, but there were less than 30 extraordinary materials in such an underground transaction. Touched the £7 note in her pocket, and then wanted to think about Miss Justice's attitude towards £1,000. Klein got up silently and sighed. "Unfortunately, there is nothing I want." Before the old man asked, he quickly turned around, opened the door of the partition, and went out, back to the underground market. Klein looked at the front and stayed for a few seconds, feeling with a wry smile in my mind, "I am probably the poorest secret organization boss." This made him more determined to get materials from the inside of the Night Watchman or to find justice and exchange ideas with others. After 2 rounds around the underground market, Klein selected and bought Materials for making spells, such as semi-finished silver pieces, such as herbal powder and natural ore needed for the ceremony, which cost him 1 pound and 15 souls in total. There is a total of 5 pounds and 10 souls left in the private money, and there is still 1 pound and 10 souls after removing the entrusted balance. Kleinmeyer counted his financial situation and felt helpless. Of course, he knows very well that this is because he has only been working for more than a month. If the time is extended to 1 year, more than 100 pounds can still be saved. In 2 weeks, I have to tell Benson and Melissa that my salary has increased by 3 pounds so I can hire a handyman, so there is no private money. Klein thought as he walked to the front door of the underground trading market. Just then, he saw old Neil in a black classical robe slowly coming in, all bought. Old Neil walked over and said hello. Yes. Klein answered frankly. Old Neil suddenly chugged. You're so early. It's because I'm still hungry and you've had dinner. Klein exchanged pleasantries with old Neil very casually. After a while, wearing a Navy officer's uniform, the owner of the Dragon Bar, Swain, came in from the outside, approached the two men with a dignified expression, and said in a low voice, I need your help. What happened? Old Neil suddenly became serious, and Klein couldn't help but mention a heart. Brown hair is a mess, with a strong smell of wine, because Heavy Voice replied, there is a member of the Scapegoat Squad who is out of control nearby. We must solve him before he causes harm to ordinary people. Chapter 129. Out of Control. Out of Control? Klein, in the mind a tight, almost blurted out rhetorical question that, although Dunn and old Neil often emphasized the danger and probability of out of control in front of him, it was still the first time that he met something similar. At that time, he was a little scared, a little confused, a little scared and a little sad, and he felt very complicated. Every year, a quarter of the events handled are out of control of the extraordinary, and a large part of them are our teammates. Dunn's words flashed in his mind, making his reaction seem to be slow. His old Neil, experienced too many similar events, immediately asked, where's the out of control? What do you need us to do? Klein was dazed for a moment. He thought that an oily and lazy semi-retiree like old Neil would find an excuse to refuse Sven's request or extort a large sum of benefits before trying to help. He didn't expect the other party to hesitate at all and directly enter the state of participation. He didn't care about the difference between the night watchman and the penalty taker. Looking at the grim-faced old Neil, Klein suddenly understood one thing, that is, no matter the night watchman, the Punisher, or the member of the Mechanical Heart, the goal is to prevent extraordinary forces from hurting the innocent and maintain the peace and stability of Tingen City. If there is a dangerous and urgent situation, it is incumbent, at this time, because of abnormal, briefly replied, be my assistant. He didn't explain why he was out of control and where he was, and quickly walked to the exit. The former Scapegoat captain is obviously just an old man who is addicted to drinking, but Klein finds that he can't keep up with the other team's footsteps and must trot to barely stay behind. He glanced at old Neil sideways, only to see that the spy, who showed signs of aging, began to run. The three men didn't care about the eyes of the guards along the way. One was dressed in an old naval officer's uniform, the other in a dark classical robe, and the other in a knee-high black trench coat. They rushed out of the billiard room, and the Dragon Bar customers who drank the wine with oil in their mouths instinctively turned their eyes away from dogs that caught mice and looked at Klein and others. Is it Boss Sven? What's he doing out in such a hurry? Some people default on their debts? In the low-pitched discussion, some drinkers put their attention back into the cage, cheered again, and vented their depression during the day, while others were more alert and vaguely uneasy. Push, push, push. Klein and old Neil followed Sven across the road and ran into the real dock area. On that ship, Sven slowed down and pointed to a river cargo lane parked not far away. Two penalty takers are dealing with the out-of-control man above, preventing him from entering the Tasik River. You help me influence him and control him, and then I will handle the matter. Old Neil bellows out a few breath way. Okay, but you need to give me a minute to get back to my state. Swain nodded, said nothing more, rushed to the cargo ship first and joined the battle, listening to the thump-thump struggle above. Old Neil saw Klein's eyes slightly nervous, took out a silver piece the size of a baby's palm from his waist pocket, and handed it over to him. Sleeping mantra. Opening mantra is the word night in ancient Hermes. After reading the mantra, pour your spirit into it and throw it at the target in 3 seconds. Klein reached out and caught it, and he was touched. The front and back of this charm are engraved with the mantra written in Hermes, as well as symbols, corresponding spiritual numbers and magic signs. He can perceive the obscure, quiet, and deep mysterious power only by relying on inspiration without opening the second sight. Old Neil straightened up, took out the same silver charm from the dark bag, and held it in his palm. He walked to the cargo ship and made a joke. Don't be nervous. Relax and think about other things. For example, I lent you that spell. If you use it, remember to make a new one and return it to me. Of course, you can wait until next month, when the material quota is restored, and then do it. This, not the Kuei, is an experienced Old Neil. Klein put the charm in the left pocket, reached out and took out the revolver in the underarm gun bag, and adjusted the firing position and triggered. I don't think I'm nervous anymore. With a gun in one hand and a walking stick, he and Old Neil boarded the cargo ship steadily through the gangway. This cargo ship has obvious traces of the times. Although it is powered by steam and has a chimney, it still retains the old configuration of mast and sail, and it only has a metal shell on the surface, and some places are made of steel, and many places are still made of wood. The thump 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 thump. The side of the cabin made of wood burst instantly, and the thorns flew about, and a figure fell out and hit the ship's side. Klein did not look at the figure's injury, and his eyes were completely focused on the monster that was flying to the crack. This monster is over 1.8 meters tall, wearing shabby shirts and trousers. The exposed place is covered with dark green scales, and the gaps between hands and feet are covered with skin membranes, like webbed toes of some aquatic animals. It has a wrinkled head, which can vaguely see the appearance of human beings, and mucus is flowing on the scales, which is constantly dripping down. It's easy. Those dark green mucus slightly corroded the deck, leaving a distinct trace. Bang. The monster who tried to rush out of the crack was punched by Sven's side and played 2 steps horizontally. Bang, bang, bang. Sven, whose muscles are exaggerated, is obviously not as strong as that monster, and his fists and feet clearly hit each other, but they can't break scales, which makes it difficult to cause substantial damage. At that time, he was very embarrassed and tottering. If it weren't for his amazing balance, if it weren't for the other penalty takers moving and shooting, Klein suspected that the blue-eyed old man would be beaten to death by the monster. Push. 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 Sven kept retreating and advancing, just like a moth who knew it was a flame but jumped at it. However, Klein could feel that he was saving something and waiting for something to bang. Sven was beaten back a few steps, which also obscured the line of sight of another Punisher. The monster seized the opportunity and immediately rushed to the crack. It's going to escape from the cabin and jump into the Tassoc River. Looking at the wrinkled and slimy head, Klein raised his right hand and pulled. The triggered bang. The silver hunting bullet hit the monster's trunk as he expected, but it only broke the scales and was embedded in half. The monster suddenly let out a shrill scream, his feet hard, and the wind jumped out and pounced on Klein. The nose dived into the thick fishy smell, and Klein suddenly fell short and rolled to the side. Bang. He felt the hull flash and some debris hit him. At the same time, he heard an old and deep voice, which was a mantra read in ancient Hermes. Night. Klein rolled twice again, without picking up his cane, and hurriedly raised his gun, only to see Old Neil calmly throw out the spell in his hand when he was not far from the monster. The silver sheet was quickly shrouded in dark red flame and made a slight explosion. Deep, quiet power instantly dissipated, and the monster that almost smashed the ship's rail shook and became slowed. At this time, Swain ran out of the cabin, bullied the monster, twisted his waist and swung his arm, and even waved. Several punches like a machine gun, all of which hit each other's heads. But he can only make a crack and can't cause fatal damage. but Klein can feel that the savings of the blue-eyed old man are about to reach the peak. Bang. The monster seems to have recovered, swung his forearm, and swung Sven back 5 steps, each step stepping out of the fracture on the deck. Seeing the monster just visible and jumping off the cargo ship, Klein quickly took out the sleeping charm from his pocket with his left hand. Then, he skillfully read out a word in ancient Hermes. Night. Between Horan, Klein only felt that the silver spell in his palm became cold, just like the accumulation of snowflakes. He didn't think much, poured his spirit into the spell, pulled his shoulders and shook his arms, and threw it at the monster. At this moment, the fishman monster has jumped into the air. The dark red flame lit up the surrounding darkness, and the slight explosion seemed to be a prelude to hypnosis. Rippling quickly, bang, the monster fell straight on the dock, huddled up, and briefly entered a state of semi-slumber. Klein was waiting to grab the ship's rail and shoot at the monster's head. Suddenly, he saw that Sven, who had lost his naval officer's uniform, rushed out and followed him. He adjusted his posture in midair, and his muscles bulged. In Klein's inspiration, something depressed to the extreme broke out. Sven fell from the sky and hit the monster, then straightened up and punched down heavily, hitting the other person's head. Click. The monster's head was divided, and dark red blood and gray brain tissue were scattered all over the floor, accompanied by dark green mucus. This is one of the abilities of the Rage people? Klein stood beside the broken ship's rail and said to himself silently. Old Neil, clutching his left hand, leaned in and looked down with him. At this time, Swain stood up straight and stood there, staring deeply at the monster who lost his life at his feet. He took out a flat metal hip flask from nowhere, tore open the lid, drank less than half of it, then tilted the bottle mouth, aimed at the monster, and spilled all the remaining spirits on each other. After all this, Sven seems to be getting old at once, and his back is hunched for a few minutes. Old Neil sighed, looked at the scene below, and whispered to Klein, I know this out-of-control Punisher. He followed Sven for 20 or 30 years. Once cleared the water ghosts who killed people ashore, and arrested the evil extraordinary people who tried to escape from the Tassoc River. He didn't go on, but Klein recognized his hidden meaning. Such a guard who made a lot of contributions and killed many monsters eventually turned into a monster. This is not an isolated case, but a possible ending for many night watchmen, penalty takers, and members of the Mechanical Heart. Put on. The shelf. It has been secretly uploaded for 2 months, and it's time to put it on the shelves. In these 2 months, I hardly wrote any testimonials and nagged, and I didn't communicate with you much. This is mainly because I feel more and more that the best communication between the author and the reader must be in the novel. What I want to express and tell is all in the story I wrote, and there's no need to say anything extra going back to the book The Lord of Secrets. I probably have an idea that I want to get back the pleasure when I first came into contact with online novels, the pleasure of, oh, there is such a world, and there is such a magical world. At that time, every book brought me a different, strange, and interesting world, which made me always eye-opening, always addicted, and always expanded my imagination. Of course, this is also the reason why I've been exposed to too few similar novels before. Therefore, when I feel ready to build a relatively novel world and an interesting and novel system independently, I am uneasy and full of courage to start this book. There are 22 ways, 220 kinds of potions, and 220 different occupations, with acting as the core. This is the part that I hope to interest you most. In addition, there is the world that is mixed with Cthulhu style, SCP Foundation elements, the customs of the First Industrial Revolution era, and steampunk feelings that I have read a lot of books and made a lot of settings, but I know that what I need most is to tell the story well, and to tell it slowly, which is why I slowed down the rhythm of the first book extremely and updated the 410,000-word free chapter. I want to go to the plot honestly, outline the characters, describe the world, and present the picture I want to share with you without pursuing the so-called climax. That thanks to Master Wudow's writing, I also have an attractive level in daily stories, and I have the ability to tell stories honestly and write before I learn to express, or every writer and author can express instinctively, but now, I feel that I am beginning to learn to exercise restraint. Many times I will talk about it, and I will only use actions, language, and expressions to present my emotions instead of making inner monologues, and maybe even describe it coldly, just like the chapter on lead and white women workers, which is what I hope to be the master of secrecy. The various structures of this book are probably the most comprehensive one among my several books. And we will wait and see what to take care of before and after. These are my thoughts and attempts in this book. I hope you will like it. I hope you can stick to it by subscribing. After all, I still have to eat, and I still have to buy clothes, skirts, bags, and houses for my daughter-in-law. I have always been a vulgar person, which I never doubt. At the same time, I am also a lazy person with a very problematic personality that I once thought about organizing my fans, just like other authors, but alas, I am so annoyed and tired, and then there is no more that I once thought about opening a Weibo to gather people's popularity, but alas, I'm so annoyed and tired. Then there is no more. I don't know how long it has been since I updated Weibo that I got the WeChat official account and tried to write something, but alas, it was so annoying and tiring. And then it took a long time to update it. I once tried to ask someone to help enliven WeChat official account, but when I saw what others posted, I always felt embarrassed and blushed, so I stopped. Oh, I want to make a reconciliation with myself now. Admit it. You are a lazy person. You are a person with defective interpersonal communication. You are a person with a thin face and a proud face. You are a person who doesn't like being disturbed by various chores, and you are a person who can't help the wall with mud. Perhaps what I can do well, and am willing to do well, is to write a novel and tell the story in my heart. The above is my reconciliation with myself. No longer struggling to live. No longer demanding anything to gather popularity. WeChat official account or something. Even more thought, even more content, but I didn't expect to forget it. Well, reconciliation is just the persuasion of literature and art. Accurately describing it should be self-defeating, and it is manually funny here. After the communication, I will update the VIP chapter in the early morning of tomorrow, that is, a few minutes after 12 o'clock this evening, and ask for a subscription in advance and a monthly ticket. I will break out.